Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back, to a place where the air smells like baked earth and river water, and the sun rises heavy and gold over the flat plains of Mesopotamia. You're standing at the edge of Uruk, the first city that ever really tried to be a city. The year? Give or take 5,000 before your last tax return. The ground under your sandals is packed mud and straw. The streets narrow and full of bleeding goats and sleepy merchants dragging carts of barley. It's the start of another day in a world that doesn't yet know the word money, but already has a problem every civilization learns sooner or later. People keep forgetting who owes what. You take a breath and squint at the skyline. Mud brick walls, tall as your house, shimmer in the early heat. Somewhere beyond them, temple bells thud softly, calling workers to the ziggurat where barley, wool, fish, and dates all need counting. The temple owns nearly everything in Uruk, and with ownership comes one tedious duty: bookkeeping. You probably wouldn't survive a week here. Between the sun, the smell, and the endless math by hand, your modern patience would crack like a clay pot in summer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there. I love seeing our little sleepy map of the world fill up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking toward the temple courtyard, sandals whispering on the dust. The air is thick with smoke from morning fires. Women carry baskets of barley. Men herd bleeding goats, and a few clever traders whisper about deals. The word doesn't mean much yet. There's no coin, no signature, no receipt. But already you can sense that quiet tension of, I gave you this. You owe me that. Morning returns to Uruk, soft and gold and already humming with life. You wake to the distant creak of a rope pulley and the soft slosh of water jars being lowered into the canal. The air smells faintly of wet earth and roasted barley, the city's breakfast perfume. You rub your eyes, brush a bit of dust from your tunic, and follow the sound of counting. Not the loud kind, not the sort of counting that shouts across a marketplace, but the whispering kind that shapes civilization in quiet corners. You find yourself beside a merchant's stall shaded by a reed mat. On the ground lies a basket full of tiny clay shapes, cones, discs, and spheres, all baked until they're as hard as your morning toast. Each one stands for something: a sheep, a jar of oil, a basket of dates. The system is so simple it's brilliant, like an abacus without numbers. A trader kneels beside them, arranging the little tokens in neat piles while a customer, a sunburned farmer with cracked hands, waits, watching suspiciously. The merchant murmurs, 2 cones for 2 jars of oil, 1 sphere for 1 goat. His voice is patient but bored. You can tell this isn't his first transaction today, nor his 50th. He slides the shapes across the dirt with the slow precision of a man who's made peace with tedium. Civilization's first accountants, it seems, were already dreaming of a coffee break. This is the world before writing. No alphabet, no ink, no receipts fluttering in pockets. Just clay and memory and the occasional argument. Historians still argue whether these tokens began as game pieces, charms, or pure accounting tools. Maybe they started as all three. One theory suggests children first played with them, imitating adults, before adults realized that the kids' toys worked better than their memories. Practical miracle born of playtime. You kneel closer. The merchant gestures to a small pouch hanging from a peg. It's made of rough leather, worn shiny at the edges. The next morning begins in the same sleepy rhythm. Goats bleating, water sloshing, traders yawning over their baskets. But something in the air feels different. You can sense it in the way the scribes move, a quiet urgency under the rising heat. You follow a trail of footprints through the narrow alleys toward the temple workshop, where a group of apprentices huddle around a potter's wheel. On the floor beside them lies a mound of wet clay, glistening like chocolate in the morning light. Here, the next small miracle of bureaucracy is about to take shape. Sealed clay envelopes. You kneel beside one apprentice as he rolls a lump of clay between his palms, flattening it into a thin sheet. He folds it over on itself, shaping a hollow ball, about the size of an orange. His teacher, a stooped old man with a reed stylus tucked behind one ear, watches closely. The boy carefully drops 3 tiny clay tokens inside: a cone, a disc, a small sphere. Then he seals the opening with another pinch of clay, smooths the seam with damp fingers, and exhales. The sound that escapes his lips isn't relief exactly. It's concentration meeting curiosity. He presses the surface gently, feeling the faint rattle of the tokens within. Then, just to be sure, he takes his stylus and draws a few simple marks on the outside. They're not yet writing, not symbols that carry meaning, but they hint at the concept. What's inside matters. You tilt your head, fascinated. A sealed clay envelope, an envelope that can't be opened without breaking it. Seems like an absurdly fragile way to remember a deal, but it works. You can't tamper with it without leaving a trace. It's as if the Sumerians have invented the first form of data encryption, 5,000 years before anyone thought to password protect a spreadsheet. A scribe sitting nearby explains to a young trader that the envelope is a contract between 2 parties. If there's ever a dispute, the temple can break it open in front of witnesses. By mid-morning, the market hums with the familiar rhythm of trade, but your attention is drawn to a quieter miracle happening under the shade of a low reed canopy. The first pressed marks the humble birth of what we now call a receipt. You kneel beside a scribe who carefully presses a stylus into soft clay, leaving wedge-shaped impressions that correspond to the tokens inside a sealed envelope. One mark for barley, another for a goat, a tiny triangle for a jar of oil. It's almost imperceptible, yet profoundly revolutionary. You can't help but smile at the ingenuity. In this moment, someone has found a way to externalize memory. No longer does a merchant need to rely on a shaky recall or a grumbling farmer's honesty. The clay itself now says, "This was given. This was received." You can almost hear the universe whisper a slow sigh of relief. The first paper trail, albeit in baked mud. The scribe explains, though you only catch fragments, that the marks act like a guarantee. You press the tokens into the clay before sealing them, and once hardened, the impressions cannot lie. You run your fingers lightly over the indentations. Each wedge is a promise frozen in time. There's a certain absurd charm to it. Imagine your modern receipts, crumpled and lost in a wallet, suddenly immortalized in sun-baked clay. You'd probably still grumble about long lines at the checkout. Nearby, a merchant adjusts his pouch, full of loose tokens. He mutters to himself, something along the lines of, "Better safe than sorry," though the Sumerian words tumble awkwardly on his tongue. You realize that he's describing human anxiety with a medium so permanent it will outlast empires. There's a comforting hum in that, almost like a lullaby, the idea that memory can live outside the brain. Historians still argue whether these pressed marks were initially meant as practical accounting tools, or whether they carried symbolic, almost ritualistic weight. You step out of the temple into the courtyard again, and the air feels thick with the faint dust of crushed clay and the scent of barley drying in the sun. Today, your attention drifts toward the temple's storehouses, where the quiet machinery of a Sumerian economy hums softly beneath the sounds of goats bleating and merchants whispering. Inside, shelves rise like silent walls of memory, stacked with jars, baskets, and clay tablets that chronicle hundreds of transactions. Each item is accounted for, each grain of barley, each bolt of wool, a small part of a much larger rhythm. You trudge along narrow aisles between shelves, brushing your fingers across clay tablets. Each tablet is different. Some are small, holding a single transaction. Others are larger, encompassing entire weeks of labor and trade. You notice the fingerprints left in the clay, tiny human traces that make you wonder about the hands that pressed them, the people behind the numbers. It's repetitive work, yes, but there's a quiet poetry to it, like watching raindrops fall into a puddle. Patterns emerge, vanish, and repeat. Historians still argue whether temple record-keeping was primarily religious or economic in nature. Some believe every tablet and envelope was a prayer to Inanna or Enlil, a ritualized acknowledgement of divine oversight. Others insist it was pragmatic, purely to maintain order in the messy, complex world of early trade. You like to imagine it's both practical devotion, faith disguised as numbers, a gentle nod to gods who might appreciate a well-kept ledger. A priest passes by, murmuring something unintelligible as he inspects a stack of envelopes. He seems satisfied and moves on, leaving you alone with the rhythm of the temple's quiet arithmetic. You notice how the scribes organize the tablets. By date, by type of commodity, even by scribes' initials, small scratches that personalize each record. It's the first system of filing you've ever seen, elegant in its simplicity. You follow the dust-lined path out of the temple courtyard and into the open fields, where the farmers of Uruk rise slowly with the sun, their bare feet crunching against hardened clay and scattered barley husks. The scent of earth, warmed by morning light, fills your nose as you walk alongside a weary farmer carrying a wicker basket. Inside lie tokens, small cones and discs representing the goods he brings to trade: barley, goats, maybe a few jars of oil. You can feel his tiredness, the long walk from distant plots of land to the temple granary, and yet there is purpose in every step. The farmer approaches the scribe waiting near the gate, hands extended, tokens jingling faintly in their leather pouch. The scribe sorts them meticulously, pressing each one into soft clay before sealing them in an envelope. You watch, fascinated, as the farmer leans on his staff, scanning the courtyard, counting the goats in his mind. It's a quiet negotiation. He delivers, he receives acknowledgement, and the clay will remember. You can almost hear the soft inner monologue. I hope the temple counts correctly. I need these receipts to survive the next season. Historians still argue whether rural farmers fully understood the implications of these clay receipts, or if they treated them as ritual objects, necessary formalities, or merely a practical way to avoid disputes. Some think the farmers were sophisticated record keepers themselves, while others suggest they handed over tokens with a vague hope that the scribes would sort out the details. You like to imagine the tension between trust and anxiety mingling in the air, the very human struggle to hand over your livelihood and rely on someone else to honor it. Nearby, a few children chase after a stray goat, laughing as it darts between baskets of grain. One trips and lands on a small pile of tokens, scattering them across the dirt. The farmer sighs and bends down, collecting them carefully, ensuring none are lost. The sun leans low in the sky, softening the hard edges of Uruk's mud brick walls into gentle shadows, and you find yourself wandering through the bustling market square. Merchants rearrange baskets of barley, goats bleat softly in their pens, and the occasional tinkling of water from a nearby canal adds a calming rhythm to the scene. You watch as a trader carefully counts his tokens, each one a small clay monument to a past transaction, before pressing them into a new envelope. The slow, deliberate motion feels almost hypnotic, like the pulse of the city itself. Nearby, a scribe is seated beneath the shade of a reed canopy, flattening clay into small rectangles, pressing wedge marks to indicate quantities, and carefully placing tokens inside. You notice the precision in his movements, each impression intentional, each line a tangible representation of memory. It's an oddly soothing spectacle, the way human ingenuity manifests in these small, methodical actions, each tablet a bridge between forgetfulness and certainty. Historians still argue whether these early Sumerian clay envelopes were primarily functional, ritualistic, or a blend of both. Some believe that pressing tokens into clay served as an offering to the gods, a humble acknowledgement of divine oversight in everyday commerce. Others insist that pragmatism alone drove the innovation, a simple solution to the recurring problem of misplaced goods and forgotten agreements. You like to think it was both, a practical magic that made humans feel a little safer in an unpredictable world. A young boy carries a basket of tokens, carefully avoiding a stray goat as he walks. He trips slightly, and the tokens clatter softly onto the ground. The scribe glances up, frowns in mild exasperation, but then smiles. Mistakes happen, you realize, even in civilizations that thrive on order. The boy carefully collects the tokens, counts them twice, and places them back into the envelope. Evening settles over Uruk like a warm blanket, softening the edges of mud brick walls and quieting the chatter in the marketplace. You wander back toward the temple, where flickering torches cast long shadows across rows of drying clay envelopes and tablets. The air smells faintly of baked earth, mingled with the sweetness of roasted barley and the distant tang of the canal. Everything slows as the day winds down. The city exhales, and you notice how even in this ancient world, humans have a natural rhythm of work and rest. Inside the temple workshop, scribes move methodically, finishing the day's tally. One adjusts a row of envelopes, ensuring that each is properly sealed and marked. You lean closer, intrigued by the delicate wedge impressions that record the contents inside. 2 jars of oil, 3 cones for barley, 1 small sphere representing a goat. These tiny symbols carry immense weight, preserving memory in a way words cannot. It's the quiet magic of bureaucracy, almost meditative, almost hypnotic. Historians still debate whether these clay impressions represent an early form of writing or merely a sophisticated accounting system. Some suggest that each wedge and mark was a precursor to cuneiform, a seed of literacy sprouting from the soil of necessity. Others insist it was purely pragmatic, a method to keep track of goods, nothing more. Either way, the act of recording is undeniably human, a gesture toward permanence in a world of fleeting days. A young apprentice hums softly while pressing tokens into a fresh envelope, the melody rhythmic and comforting. You notice his small quirks, the wedge slightly angled, a dot pressed too deep, perhaps a playful flourish or a moment of distraction. Even in strict systems, humans leave traces of themselves, tiny signatures embedded in clay that might puzzle or amuse future archaeologists. You smile at the thought. The first graffiti of civilization hidden in plain sight. Night fully embraces Uruk, softening the city into muted shades of brown and gold under the silver glow of the moon. The distant canal murmurs, carrying reflections of flickering torches along its surface, while the occasional bleat of a goat reminds you that life doesn't pause, even in darkness. You wander back to the temple, where the day's labor has slowed but not ceased. A few dedicated scribes remain, finishing late records by the glow of oil lamps. The air is thick with clay dust, warm from the day's sun, and a faint smell of smoke lingers from nearby hearths. You approach a scribe meticulously reviewing a set of newly hardened envelopes. Each envelope contains pressed tokens, cones, discs, spheres, carefully counted, sealed, and marked. He checks the wedge impressions for consistency, occasionally adjusting a slightly crooked line with his stylus. It's a delicate, almost tender process. You realize that even in the quietest moments, the act of record-keeping requires patience, discipline, and a certain reverence for permanence. Historians still debate whether these envelopes were primarily tools of economic necessity or if they carried a subtle ritual significance. Some scholars suggest that the very act of pressing clay and preserving tokens was an offering to the gods, a prayer to maintain balance and order in the world. Others insist the practice was purely practical, a system of accountability in an increasingly complex urban environment. You like to imagine it is both a blend of faith and functionality, like the world's first hybrid between work and meditation. Outside, the city has settled into a gentle rhythm. The sounds of daytime commerce have faded into a soft murmur of evening activity. A lone goat grazes near the temple wall, nose twitching at stray grains of barley. Children have long gone home, leaving behind faint echoes of laughter and the occasional jingle of forgotten tokens. The following morning begins with a soft haze drifting over Uruk, golden light spilling over mud brick walls and glinting off the scattered clay tablets and envelopes drying in the temple courtyard. You step out, brushing dust from your tunic, and notice the city slowly waking. Merchants arranging baskets, goats bleating in the distance, and the occasional splash of water from the canal as it carries the faint aroma of reeds and fresh clay. There's a calm rhythm to the day's beginning, a gentle pulse that you can almost feel underfoot. You wander past a group of scribes kneeling on mats in the shade, each one pressing tokens into clay envelopes, sealing them, and adding wedge marks with a steady, almost meditative cadence. One scribe hums a faint tune, the rhythm of his stylus scraping against clay blending with distant animal noises and the soft murmur of the canal. You lean in, watching the meticulous care in his work. Each mark is deliberate, each wedge carries meaning, and the act itself feels like a ritual, both functional and spiritual. Historians still argue whether this process was primarily practical, serving as the backbone of temple commerce, or if it also carried symbolic weight, a subtle invocation of divine oversight over human affairs. Some suggest that pressing tokens into clay and sealing them was a sacred acknowledgement of cosmic order. Others insist it was purely an accounting measure, a clever solution to the messy problem of tracking goods. You imagine it was likely both, a small daily act where the sacred and mundane intertwine seamlessly. A small apprentice approaches, balancing a pile of tokens in a woven basket. He carefully counts and passes them to a scribe, who immediately begins pressing them into clay. You watch as the stylus dips and scratches, leaving wedge marks and tiny impressions corresponding to each token. The evening descends gently over Uruk, and the temple courtyard glows with the soft orange light of oil lamps. Shadows stretch lazily across the ground, mingling with the warm hues of drying clay and scattered barley husks. You wander slowly among the rows of pressed envelopes, marveling at their uniformity, and the subtle variations that reveal the individuality of each scribe. Even under the dim light, you can see the precision in the wedges, the careful impressions that encode transactions, and the tiny quirks that bring humanity to each tablet. A scribe works near the far wall, his stylus tracing neat wedge marks into a fresh envelope, his movements measured and almost hypnotic. You watch him press tokens gently into the clay. A disc for barley, a cone for oil, a small sphere for a goat. The rhythm of his hands, the lift, the press, the seal, is oddly soothing, a delicate ballet of human intent frozen in clay. It's quiet, repetitive, and strangely comforting, like listening to a familiar lullaby. Historians still argue about the symbolic weight of these clay envelopes. Were they purely economic tools, or did they carry spiritual significance, a ritualized acknowledgement of divine oversight in human affairs? Some believe that pressing tokens into clay was both practical and sacred, a daily act of devotion woven seamlessly into commerce. Others suggest that the religious aspect is overemphasized, and the process was largely about accuracy and accountability. You like to imagine that the truth rests somewhere in between, in the small pause between press and seal, in the thoughtfulness of human hands shaping the clay. A playful detail catches your attention. An apprentice, clearly amused, has pressed a tiny indentation off to the side of an envelope, creating what looks like a faint, smiling face. The senior scribe glances over, raises an eyebrow, and lets it slide. The following morning dawns softly over Uruk, casting pale light across the mud-brick walls and dust-laden streets. You step into the temple courtyard, feeling the cool morning breeze carry the faint scent of baked clay and fresh barley. The city hums gently around you, the low murmur of merchants preparing their stalls, the distant bleating of goats, and the rhythmic splash of water in the canal all blend into a calming urban symphony. You notice how the rhythm of human activity, steady and unhurried, seems almost designed to soothe, a perfect backdrop for observing the meticulous work of Sumerian scribes. You approach a group of scribes kneeling in the soft light, styluses in hand. They press tokens into clay envelopes with quiet concentration, sealing each envelope carefully before adding wedge marks to indicate contents. The precision is mesmerizing. Each mark is both functional and personal, a testament to the individual who crafted it. You lean closer and trace the subtle variations, slight angles, the depth of a wedge, a small dot placed slightly off-center, that humanize the otherwise uniform rows of envelopes. Historians still debate the extent to which these early records represented a form of writing versus a sophisticated accounting system. Some argue that the wedge impressions, though primarily economic, carried symbolic weight, marking a transition toward abstract representation in written communication. Others suggest the markings were purely practical, an efficient method to track transactions in a growing urban environment. You like to think that every wedge, every pressed token, straddled both worlds, the functional and the symbolic, the mundane and the sacred. Nearby, a young apprentice carries a basket brimming with tokens, carefully avoiding the stray goats roaming the courtyard. He counts the tokens twice before handing them to a senior scribe, who presses them into clay and seals the envelope with precise care. Twilight drapes Uruk in soft shades of amber and rose, casting elongated shadows across the temple courtyard. You wander through the fading light, stepping carefully over scattered tokens and envelopes drying in the sun, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath your feet. The city hums quietly around you, merchants packing their stalls, goats settling into pens, and the gentle ripple of the canal reflecting the fading sky. There's a unique calm to this hour, a pause in the rhythm of daily life that feels almost sacred. Inside the workshop, a few dedicated scribes remain, pressing tokens into clay envelopes and adding wedge impressions to record the day's transactions. Each mark is precise, deliberate, and strangely hypnotic. The motion is soothing in its repetition. Lift the stylus, press it into clay, seal the envelope, check the impression. Even small misalignments are handled with patience and care, a subtle acknowledgement of the human hand behind the work. You can almost feel the soft vibration of their focus, a quiet pulse connecting past and present. Historians still debate whether the envelopes served a purely functional purpose or carried symbolic significance as offerings to the gods. Some scholars argue that pressing tokens into clay was an act of devotion, a way to ensure divine acknowledgement of human effort. Others insist it was strictly pragmatic, a clever solution to maintain accountability in a bustling economy. You like to imagine it as a blend, a daily ritual of both practicality and reverence, where the sacred and mundane coexist in a soft, imperceptible harmony. A young apprentice approaches with a small basket of tokens, carefully balancing them as he hands them to a scribe. One disc slips and rolls across the floor, prompting a quiet chuckle from the scribe as he nudges it back into place. Scholars still argue whether such minor imperfections were accidents, playful flourishes, or subtle codes for other scribes. Night fully descends over Uruk, the city wrapped in a blanket of deep indigo, punctuated by flickering torchlight and the faint glimmer of stars above. The temple courtyard is quiet now, the day's activities winding to a gentle close. You wander slowly among the stacks of clay envelopes, tablets, and tokens, each one a small monument to human effort, patience, and trust. The air carries the faint scent of baked clay, barley, and distant smoke from cooking fires, an olfactory lullaby for anyone who lingers long enough to notice. Inside the workshop, a few last scribes remain, their styluses moving with the precision and rhythm born of years of practice. Each press of a wedge into clay is deliberate, a soft imprint of human memory preserved against the vagaries of time. You watch a scribe straighten an envelope, check its impressions, and tuck it carefully into a stack. The repetition is hypnotic, and you feel a soft, almost meditative calm settling over you. Even the occasional slight imperfection, the misaligned token, the smudge of a finger, adds character, reminding you that this orderly world is made by human hands, not machines. Historians still debate whether these envelopes were purely practical accounting tools or also carried symbolic or religious weight. Some argue that each pressed token was a subtle invocation to the gods, a prayer for fairness and abundance. Others insist it was entirely pragmatic, a clever solution to the problem of tracking goods in a growing city. You like to imagine it was both a gentle fusion of devotion and duty, where every transaction had a touch of ritual in its routine. Outside, a lone farmer retrieves his sealed envelopes, nodding politely to the scribes and tucking them carefully into his satchel. These envelopes are more than proof. They are assurances, anchors of trust in a world that could be unpredictable. Civilization, it seems, begins not with war or kings, but with the uneasy art of remembering. Inside the courtyard, the walls gleam with plaster, smooth and cool. You catch sight of a scribe sitting cross-legged beside a low table. His reed stylus rests across a small lump of wet clay. He's young, maybe 16, with ink-stained fingers and the weary focus of someone who's already had to recount 100 jars of oil before breakfast. Behind him, baskets overflow with grain, tribute to the goddess Inanna, and someone somewhere has to keep track of it all. That's where you come in, or rather, that's where they invented you. Because without record keepers, the whole system would collapse. Historians still argue whether it was bureaucracy or belief that built the first cities. But one thing's certain. No one was going to remember how many goats each farmer owed without writing it down somehow. For now, the system is charmingly low-tech. A small clay pebble represents a jar of oil. A cone stands for a measure of grain. The tokens are tucked into little leather pouches or baskets, each one rattling like a primitive cash register. But there's a problem. When someone disputes a trade, how do you prove which tokens belong to whom? The tokens don't lie, but hands do. The scribe frowns at his clay lump. He's still learning, but he knows what his master says. Clay remembers what the mind forgets. He smooths the surface, presses the stylus just deep enough to make a mark that'll hold through drying. A wedge here, a line there. These marks are symbols, not quite writing yet, but on their way. When the clay hardens, it will whisper the truth. For measures barley, received by Lugal temple storehouse. Outside, a merchant argues with a priest. You can't catch every word, but you hear barley, loan, and next harvest. It's the same argument that's been happening for 7,000 years. He drops the tokens inside, shakes it once, and ties it shut with a reed fiber. The pouch jingles softly when he hands it to the farmer, like a tiny clay wallet. The farmer nods, satisfied, and trudges off. That's it. The deal is sealed. You tilt your head. But how does anyone remember what those shapes mean later? You whisper, though no one can hear you. That's the problem, of course. Once sealed, the pouch hides everything. It holds the promise of a deal, but only as long as both people remember what's inside. You imagine a few months passing, the next harvest arriving, and someone insisting, "No, I gave you 5 goats, not 4. You can almost see the argument now. One man waving the pouch, the other shaking his head, both convinced clay can lie. The Sumerians, being stubbornly clever, found a solution. They began pressing the tokens into soft clay before sealing them away. Little imprints that recorded what was inside. That way, even if someone forgot the details or conveniently misremembered, the clay would remember for them. It's the world's first redundancy system, like backing up your files before your computer crashes. You can thank these people for the concept of receipts and data integrity in one dusty stroke. A breeze drifts through the market. You hear the flap of woven mats, the bleat of a goat, a faint rhythmic tapping as a potter trims the lip of a bowl. The whole city hums with a sleepy diligence. Thousands of people doing small, repetitive things that somehow add up to civilization. Counting tokens might sound dull, but there's comfort in the predictability of it. Everyone knows what each shape means. Everyone trusts the clay. You sit near the merchant for a while, watching the pattern repeat. Cone, sphere, disc, pouch, knot, nod. Occasionally, someone complains, "That sphere looks smaller than usual," and the merchant sighs, holds it to the light, and mutters something that's probably ancient Sumerian for, "I don't get paid enough for this." Inside, the tokens reveal what was agreed upon. No lying, no guesswork, no convenient forgetting. The clay once again remembers. You glance around the workshop. The air smells of wet earth, sweat, and smoke from the kiln outside. Apprentices chatter softly, each one shaping their own envelope, each one part of this quiet revolution in trust. Outside, a courier waits with a donkey to deliver the finished pieces to the market. They'll be stored in reed baskets, marked with names scratched on wet clay tags. It's the dawn of record storage, the first archives, dusty and sunlit. Historians still argue whether these envelopes were invented purely for economic reasons, or if they also served a sacred purpose. Some think they were offerings to the gods, little clay prayers shaped in the language of numbers. Others insist they were practical tools, nothing more than the world's earliest receipts. You like the thought that maybe they were both a fusion of divine faith and fiscal anxiety. A young woman, her hair tied in a neat braid, carries a tray of freshly sealed envelopes toward the drying yard. The sun glows white on her shoulders. She lays each one out gently, like eggs waiting to hatch into permanence. The yard itself is a mosaic of drying clay, hundreds of small orbs, each holding a secret deal inside. You imagine the whisper of all those tokens rattling faintly in the breeze. As you walk among them, you can't help thinking of modern safes, data centers, even cloud backups. It's the same human instinct. We make something fragile to preserve something valuable. Maybe that's our oldest contradiction. A merchant arrives, flanked by 2 assistants carrying heavy baskets. He bows slightly to the scribe at the gate. 3 goats, 10 jars of oil, he mutters, handing over a pouch. The scribe nods, counts the tokens, then gestures for a clay envelope to be prepared. The merchant watches as the process unfolds. Tokens inside, seal pressed, stylus marks added. Some suggest that every wedge pressed into clay was a kind of prayer to the gods of order and honesty, a tiny talisman against chaos. Others insist pragmatism alone drove the invention. You like to imagine it was both. A sacred, everyday act, business and belief intertwined, one foot in the divine, the other in dusty commerce. The market drifts around you. A child runs past, scattering stray tokens, giggling. The merchant sighs but can't help smiling. These tokens, pressed into clay, are not just numbers. They are playful, tactile objects that humans have somehow imbued with authority. You remember that earlier tale of the children stacking them into towers. Play and work have always been closely intertwined. A quirky detail catches your eye. Some marks are slightly off-center, as if the scribe was sleepy or distracted. Perhaps he was counting a bit too fast or humming an early tune to himself. Maybe he dropped the stylus once, leaving a curious extra indentation. Historians still debate whether these variations were mistakes, artistic flourishes, or early attempts at personalization. You wonder if future archaeologists will interpret them as intent, genius, or just human imperfection. Outside the canopy, the city hums with normal life. Goats bleat in the distance. A potter smacks a half-formed jar against a workbench. You notice the subtle, almost hypnotic rhythm of it all. It's easy to imagine that, in this environment, pressing marks into clay would have a meditative quality. You might even call it the original ASMR of accounting. The sun climbs higher, warming the clay. The impressions harden slowly, capturing each transaction's essence. You can feel the weight of human ingenuity in your hands. One wedge, one line, one triangle, small gestures that ripple forward through history. You press lightly on a newly hardened tablet, almost reverently, thinking about all the lives it touches. Later, a priest approaches the scribe. Outside the storehouses, a farmer arrives with a handful of clay tokens. You watch as he hands them to a young scribe who quickly arranges them into the appropriate envelope. The scribe presses the tokens gently into soft clay, then seals the envelope and adds a few wedge-shaped marks to indicate what's inside. The farmer nods, satisfied, and trudges away. This is the quiet heartbeat of the temple economy. Barter, memory, and the slow assurance that your obligations are documented. You notice the temperature rising as the sun climbs higher. Dust swirls lazily across the floor, drifting over baskets of barley and wool. A cat weaves around your feet, brushing against a stack of envelopes with the familiar indifference cats have always had toward human enterprise. You can't help smiling. Even in this distant past, some things remain constant. Some tablets contain mundane transactions. Barley exchanged for beer, wool traded for goat milk, a few jars of oil redistributed among temple staff. Others are slightly more curious, tiny sketches of animals, doodles of symbols that may or may not mean something. Scholars still debate whether these are early attempts at symbolic writing, playful scribbles, or simple mistakes. Either way, they remind you that humans have always left traces of personality in even the most routine work. You pause near a shelf filled with larger envelopes. One of them contains dozens of tokens pressed carefully into the clay. The envelope is heavy, and you imagine the responsibility resting on the scribe who recorded it. One small mistake, one miscounted cone or disc, could ripple through the system, and yet the system persists. It hums along, steady and tireless, like a clock wound by human hands rather than gears. A faint sound of water dripping echoes from the canal outside, a soft counterpoint to the quiet murmur of counting and arranging. You notice the apprentice rubbing a tablet to smooth the surface, almost absent-mindedly. It's funny in a sleepy, human way. Moments like this have repeated themselves across millennia, though today we call it misplacing paperwork. You chuckle quietly, imagining future accountants staring at spreadsheets, thinking, I should have just used clay. The farmer receives his own clay receipt. A small envelope, carefully sealed, stamped with wedge marks indicating the contents of his trade. He holds it to his chest, reverently like a talisman. It's more than proof. It's reassurance, an anchor in the chaotic flow of seasons, harvests, and market disputes. Each envelope contains not just the record of a transaction, but the quiet promise that the work of his hands will be acknowledged and preserved. You wander along the rows of barley drying in the sun, noting the repetitive precision with which the workers have arranged the bundles. Each stack is measured, counted, and recorded. Even small errors, miscounted cones, or slightly uneven heaps are accounted for, corrected in subsequent receipts. The system hums with a quiet reliability, a gentle rhythm of trust reinforced by repetition and human attention. A quirky observation draws your attention. Some farmers, evidently in a rush or playful mood, have pressed tiny symbols into the clay alongside their official marks. Lines that resemble a little goat face or a miniature stalk of barley. Scholars still debate whether these are casual doodles, personal signatures, or secret codes to indicate a particularly generous delivery. You smile, thinking that even in the most serious commerce, humans find ways to add personality, humor, and individuality. As the morning stretches toward noon, you notice how the receipts shape social interactions. Farmers wait patiently for the scribe's verification, learning to negotiate without raising their voices. They nod to each other across the courtyard, sharing small bits of information about weather, bartering strategies, or local gossip. You notice the subtle rhythm in this daily choreography. Mistake, correction, repetition. It's the heartbeat of commerce. The market hums with quiet energy. A woman brings forward a bundle of barley, which the scribe measures, counts, and records with meticulous care. The tokens representing the trade are pressed into clay, sealed, and marked with wedge-shaped impressions. She nods politely, taking the finished envelope with a sense of reassurance. These envelopes are more than receipts. They are promises, physical reminders that her labor is recognized and her obligations recorded. A curious detail catches your eye. Some of the clay tablets are slightly irregular, their edges uneven or cracked from hurried handling. Scholars still debate whether these imperfections indicate mistakes, a rush day, or a purposeful method of personalization. You imagine the scribe pausing mid-press, frowning at a wedge slightly askew, and murmuring something like, "Better imperfect than forgotten." Each small flaw humanizes the work, a reminder that even in the earliest bureaucracies, people left their fingerprints, literally and figuratively. You wander through the maze of stalls, observing interactions between merchants, farmers, and scribes. The clay envelopes are exchanged, checked, and rechecked, forming a quiet network of accountability. Trust is tangible here, embedded in clay, in wedges, in tiny cones pressed carefully into their envelopes. The physicality of it is comforting. No one can argue with the shape, the indentation, the evidence preserved by the sun and kiln. Nearby, a priest passes with a serene air, inspecting tablets and envelopes. His presence adds a ritualized undertone to the otherwise mundane transactions. Even in what seems ordinary, barley for goats, wool for oil, there is reverence, a soft acknowledgement that these exchanges bind not only people, but gods, to the flow of life in Uruk. Outside, a farmer returns with a few remaining tokens from the day's trade. He kneels beside a scribe, who patiently presses them into clay and seals an envelope. The farmer nods, satisfied, and begins the slow trek home. You can almost hear the unspoken relief. Proof of labor safely recorded, a promise preserved. In this way, receipts aren't just economic tools, they're psychological anchors, quiet reassurances that effort and honesty are remembered. A quirky detail catches your eye. One envelope bears an odd smudge where a finger slipped mid-press, leaving a ghostly wedge mark. Historians still debate whether such imperfections were accidental or intentional, perhaps a subtle code indicating priority or urgency. You like to imagine it was a playful scribe's signature, a hidden wink in the careful monotony of daily work. As twilight deepens, shadows stretch across the courtyard, and the soft cooing of doves drifts from the temple roof. You notice how the clay envelopes, now hardened from the kiln or sun, glint faintly in the dying light. They feel alive, not in the sense of breathing, but as enduring markers of human activity, silent witnesses to countless exchanges, countless moments of trust, doubt, and patience. The priest walks slowly among the rows, inspecting each tablet, murmuring soft words of approval. There's an understated ceremony to the work, an acknowledgement that even mundane record-keeping is sacred in its own way. You lean back, imagining the rhythm of the day, pressing, counting, sealing, verifying. It's a quiet symphony of human diligence, a comforting, steady pulse that reassures you that civilization grows not through grand gestures alone, but through thousands of small, repetitive acts. Nearby, a cat curls around a basket of clay tokens, indifferent to the careful arrangements. You smile. Some patterns, it seems, remain constant across millennia. Cats, paperwork, and the subtle chaos that keeps life interesting. In this quiet, you notice how the clay envelopes seem almost alive, small monuments holding countless human intentions, frozen mid-action yet whispering across time. A quirky sight draws your attention. An apprentice, still lingering under the lamp's warm glow, has pressed a tiny triangle at the corner of one envelope, slightly misaligned from the official record. You smile. Historians still argue whether such marks were mistakes, playful doodles, or subtle annotations for fellow scribes. Either way, the imperfection humanizes the system. It is comforting to realize that even in this carefully ordered world, whimsy finds a place. The scribe leans back, eyes heavy but focused, as he reviews the day's work. He runs a finger along the rows of pressed wedges, tracing each line slowly, almost reverently. You notice how this tactile interaction, touching the clay, feeling the contours of each impression, creates an intimate connection between the scribe and the transactions recorded. In a way, the act itself is a form of mindfulness, a bridge between mind and matter, past and present. You wander to a stack of larger envelopes, containing more substantial transactions. Multiple goats, several jars of oil, large quantities of barley. The weight of these envelopes feels symbolic, a physical reminder of human effort and trust. Handling them gently, you can almost sense the careful negotiation, the anxiety, the satisfaction of those who created them. Every sealed envelope is a story, a fleeting moment crystallized in clay, ready to endure centuries. Historians still argue about how much farmers and merchants personally relied on temple copies versus keeping their own sets of envelopes. Regardless, the principle of accountability is clear. Documenting exchange fosters trust, ensures fairness, and keeps a civilization functioning. You lean against the cool mud wall and trace a wedge in a tablet, thinking of the countless hands that pressed similar marks over time. There's an almost hypnotic rhythm to it, a combination of focus and gentle repetition that has a soothing effect on the mind. You can see why a modern visitor might feel their eyelids growing heavy, lulled by the soft cadence of ancient bureaucracy. Outside the workshop, farmers arrive with their daily contributions. Bundles of barley, small goats, jars of oil. They hand over tokens that represent their goods, and each is meticulously counted, pressed into clay, and sealed in an envelope. You notice the reverent way they handle these envelopes, as if they carry a tangible essence of trust. Each sealed piece of clay represents a promise of accuracy, fairness, and permanence in a world that often feels fleeting. A quirky moment unfolds when one of the apprentices accidentally presses two tokens too close together, creating a tiny clump that slightly distorts the wedge marks. The senior scribe glances over, frowns briefly, then chuckles softly and gestures to continue. Scholars still debate whether these imperfections were entirely accidental or if they sometimes served as subtle codes between scribes. You like to think it was a bit of humor slipping into the solemnity, a reminder that even meticulous record-keeping has room for playfulness. As the morning stretches into afternoon, you notice the interplay between human hands and clay, tokens and wedges, light and shadow. Each envelope, each mark, is both a record and a small artifact of daily life. You trace the contours of a wedge with your fingers, imagining the scribe's focus, the farmer's anticipation, and the collective effort that sustains the city. The envelopes are more than receipts. They are miniature chronicles, snapshots of economy, trust, and human interaction frozen in time. The temple courtyard hums softly with ongoing activity. A priest passes quietly among the envelopes, inspecting some while offering a gentle word to others. Scholars still debate whether these markings were intentional flourishes, secret codes, or simply accidents. You like to think they were tiny signatures, little winks embedded in the otherwise orderly fabric of temple accounting. Outside, the distant hum of the city continues, faint but persistent. Goats bleat softly, the water in the canal laps gently against its banks, and a cat weaves through the temple courtyard, brushing against the legs of those still working. The soft layering of sounds creates a gentle, hypnotic cadence that mirrors the careful rhythm of pressing, sealing, and marking clay. Even the interruptions, the cat's tail knocking over a stray token or the occasional clatter of tools, blend seamlessly into the ambient hum of life. You wander to a corner of the courtyard where a stack of larger envelopes holds more significant transactions. Multiple goats, several jars of oil, bundles of barley. The envelopes are heavy, both physically and symbolically. Each carries the weight of effort, trust, and human memory. Handling one carefully, you can almost sense the anxiety of the farmer who delivered the tokens, the focus of the scribe recording them, and the silent reassurance of having a permanent record. Historians still debate whether merchants maintained personal copies of receipts alongside temple archives or relied solely on the centralized record. Regardless, the principle is clear. Documentation preserves memory, enforces accountability, and nurtures trust. These envelopes are not just economic tools. They are social instruments, binding individuals together in an intricate network of promises, obligations, and recognition. A soft wind stirs the courtyard, carrying the scent of baked clay and faint traces of barley. You trace a wedge mark with your fingertip, feeling the subtle indentations and imagining the hands that created them. A small mishap occurs when a disc slips, landing off-center, and the scribe chuckles quietly, nudging it back into place. Even in a civilization obsessed with order, human error finds its way in, a gentle reminder that perfection is rarely absolute. Outside the workshop, farmers bring in their daily contributions: goats, barley, jars of oil. They hand over tokens, and each is counted, pressed into clay, and recorded in envelopes. The envelopes are more than proof of delivery. They are tangible anchors of trust, physical assurances that effort and honesty are acknowledged. Each sealed piece of clay becomes a link in a chain connecting farmers, scribes, priests, and the larger society of Uruk. A quirky moment occurs when an apprentice, evidently amused, presses a tiny wedge slightly askew, leaving a small, almost whimsical mark on the envelope. Scholars still debate whether these deviations were intentional flourishes, secret codes among scribes, or simple accidents. You like to think of them as playful human touches, a subtle wink embedded in the otherwise serious business of record-keeping. As the morning drifts into afternoon, you notice how the envelopes shape social interactions. Farmers wait patiently for verification, learning negotiation and trust without the need for confrontation. Small gestures, a nod, a brief smile, a careful adjustment of tokens, carry weight, reinforcing both social bonds and practical agreements. In this way, the receipts act not only as records but as facilitators of community cohesion. The courtyard glows in the soft afternoon light. You trace your fingers along a wedge mark, imagining the scribe's hand, the farmer's anticipation, and the quiet significance of the act. Each envelope is a snapshot of life, a tiny monument to diligence, trust, and human ingenuity. Even small imperfections, the occasional misaligned token, a slightly uneven impression, add character, grounding the otherwise orderly system in the reality of human hands. You like to think they were tiny winks, little reminders that even in serious work, humanity finds a way to leave its signature. Outside, the courtyard is hushed but alive. Farmers retrieve their sealed envelopes, nodding politely as they acknowledge the scribe's meticulous work. Each envelope is a tangible promise. Your labor has been accounted for, your goods safely recorded, your place in the city acknowledged. Even in its simplicity, the act of exchanging tokens for clay envelopes represents trust, memory, and continuity. You notice how these quiet interactions build social cohesion, reinforcing bonds through routine, documentation, and mutual respect. A cat curls lazily near a stack of envelopes, indifferent to the surrounding activity. Its presence adds a soft, timeless touch, a reminder that some rhythms endure regardless of human intent. The press of clay, the counting of tokens, the wedge marks on each envelope, all these small, deliberate actions create a subtle, steady heartbeat that resonates through the courtyard. As the sun sinks further, painting the sky in deep indigos and purples, you pause to trace the contours of a wedge with your fingers. It's fascinating how much care and intention are embedded in these small impressions. They are more than economic tools. They are miniature chronicles of daily life, individual effort, and collective trust. Even minor irregularities, the slight tilt of a wedge, the faint smudge of a finger, humanize the system, connecting you to the scribes and farmers across millennia. Historians still debate how the temple archives were organized and whether duplicates of envelopes were kept by merchants or solely by the temple. Despite these uncertainties, the enduring principle remains. Recording human action preserves memory, reinforces trust, and allows society to function smoothly. You notice how the simple act of recording transforms commerce into a shared social rhythm, connecting farmers, scribes, priests, and merchants in a delicate web of mutual reliance. A playful detail draws your attention. A small wedge pressed slightly askew, perhaps a subtle joke by an apprentice or an unintentional slip. Scholars still debate whether these marks were purely accidental or served as secret annotations, a hidden communication among scribes. You like to think of them as little human touches, tiny winks left in the otherwise serious work of accounting. The courtyard is hushed now, broken only by the soft splash of water from the canal and the occasional rustle of a cat weaving between stacks of envelopes. The rhythm of life continues quietly, pressing, sealing, counting, verifying, a gentle pulse beneath the night sky. It is the heartbeat of civilization itself, steady and reassuring, forged in clay and human diligence. You pause to run your fingers over the wedge marks, tracing the curves and angles with a sense of reverence. Each mark is a story, the careful attention of the scribe, the farmer's anticipation, the temple's oversight. Collectively, they form an enduring network of memory, trust, and cooperation. A soft but persistent reminder that civilization is built not only on grand gestures, but also on meticulous, repetitive, and patient acts of daily life. As the stars gleam overhead and the torches burn low, the city settles into a deep, gentle stillness. The envelopes, tokens, and clay tablets lie quiet, yet they hum with the invisible pulse of recorded human effort. You realize that these humble clay receipts, small, precise, and unassuming, are some of the earliest whispers of order and memory, the tangible traces of trust that connect humans across time. You take a deep breath, letting the soft rhythm of pressing, sealing, and recording envelop you. Somewhere deep inside you, the part that once waited for an online refund understands this pain perfectly. You pass by the temple gate and feel the heat rising from the mud bricks. Near the wall, a woman grinds grain on a stone slab, humming softly. Her hands are white with flour, her rhythm steady. She doesn't know it, but the tokens she'll hand over later will eventually evolve into the same numbers that keep your bank account in balance. If she were to look up, maybe she'd ask what you think about interest rates or digital wallets, and you'd both laugh because here the only real currency is trust and the sun. A child runs past chasing a goat. Pot cracks somewhere nearby. You find a patch of shade beside a half-finished tablet, drying in the sun. The marks look meaningless, tiny triangles, dots, and scratches. But to the scribe who made them, they represent the lifeblood of the city. Every scratch is a promise, every wedge a memory preserved against the chaos of forgetting. Historians still argue whether these early records were meant as simple tallies or something more spiritual, an offering to the gods of order against the gods of confusion. Maybe both. You can imagine the temple priests blessing a stack of tablets, murmuring prayers that no grain will go missing. Maybe it's not so different from you double-checking your online receipt after ordering takeout. The afternoon grows warmer. You watch a boy carry a basket of freshly molded tokens to the drying yard. He trips, a few spill into the dirt, and he groans softly. You almost smile. It's the ancient equivalent of deleting an important spreadsheet by accident. His supervisor, a patient old man, just sighs and says something that probably translates to "make another copy." The city hums with rhythm now. Somewhere beyond the temple, the river glints like liquid glass. Boats drift by, loaded with reeds and jars. The markets are alive, but calm. A group of children play nearby, stacking leftover tokens like tiny towers. One pretends to be the temple priest, demanding offerings in exchange for imaginary blessings. The others giggle, hand over pebbles, and squeal when he records their payment by poking the dirt. You can't help but smile. Somewhere in their laughter lies the seed of a bureaucracy. Later, as the sun climbs higher, you wander toward the edge of the marketplace, where a trader is sorting tokens into piles on a mat. His fingers move fast. Tap, 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 like the early beats of an accountant's calculator. He mutters to himself, keeping count in the sing-song rhythm that makes numbers easier to remember. Historians still argue whether these merchants truly understood math or simply memorized patterns by rote. Either way, it worked. You crouch beside him. What happens if the wind blows your pile away? You ask quietly, though again no one answers. But you imagine his solution. He'd grab a bit of clay, press the shapes into it, and let the sun harden it. Instant backup copy. You realize, with mild amusement, that humanity has been inventing office supplies since before it had offices. A small, quirky detail catches your eye. Some tokens have tiny holes drilled through them. A later innovation, perhaps. Merchants strung them on reeds like primitive spreadsheets, sliding them back and forth as they traded. Others are painted with faint traces of red pigment, maybe to mark importance, maybe just because humans have always loved to color-code their problems. The rhythm of counting lulls you. The market hums. The clay warms under your fingers, and time itself seems to slow. You can almost feel the comfort these tokens must have brought. A physical way to tame uncertainty, to hold a promise in your palm. In a world where memory fades, clay endures. As the day stretches on, the city begins to shimmer in the heat. You hear a distant temple gong announcing midday. When it's done, the scribe blows softly across the surface and hands it over with both hands, a gesture that feels almost ceremonial. You notice the merchant hesitate before tucking it into his robe. He's holding more than clay. He's holding proof, responsibility, maybe even anxiety. Civilization has a price, and it's paperwork. Nearby, another scribe jokes with his apprentice. If we keep making envelopes, one day we'll need a second temple just to store them. The boy laughs, but it's a nervous laugh because he knows the man might be right. Already, the storage rooms are filling up with clay archives, each shelf heavy with sealed secrets. A quirky little moment catches your eye. A cat, sleek and indifferent, curls up beside a pile of envelopes, choosing bureaucracy as its pillow. You smile. Some things never change. Cats and paperwork have been inseparable since the beginning. The kiln roars to life, and you step closer to feel the heat. Inside, the newly sealed envelopes harden, glowing orange before cooling into beige silence. Once fired, they'll last millennia, longer than any parchment, longer than any memory. You wonder how many will one day be buried, forgotten, waiting for archaeologists to find them in another age, in another dream. You pick up one of the cooled envelopes, surprisingly light in your hand. You roll it gently, feel the faint bumps of the tokens inside. It's simple, it's beautiful, and it's profoundly human. the urge to document, to verify, to make things official. Historians still debate whether this was truly the moment that writing began, the first abstract marks representing real-world objects. Some argue it was, that each impression was a syllable waiting to be born. Others say writing came later, when symbols left the clay and entered the imagination. But right now, in your hands, the difference feels unimportant. The act itself, recording, is what matters. The sun lowers, washing the yard in gold. A temple worker calls for closing. He examines the pressed tablet, nods, and murmurs some blessing or approval. You can't tell which. Perhaps both. There's a sense of ceremony here, a quiet reverence for something that seems mundane but is, in truth, revolutionary. The very act of recording, marking, and preserving is a sacred human endeavor. You wander among the drying envelopes and tablets, noticing how each pressed mark is slightly unique. Even in a system built for precision, humans leave traces of themselves. Small quirks, personal flourishes. The wedge that leans a little to the left, the tiny dot that may or may not belong, the indentation slightly too deep. They remind you that bureaucracy has always had a human heartbeat beneath its structured surface. By afternoon, you find a shaded spot near the temple wall, observing the scribe's careful work. A curious cat wanders past, brushing against the clay and leaving an impromptu paw print. You chuckle softly. History is rarely tidy. Accidents and animals have always been part of the record. These imperfections, you realize, are what make the story alive, tangible, and oddly comforting. As the day stretches on, the sun softens, casting long shadows across the drying yard. You trace your fingers along a wedge and a tiny circle. Somewhere in that combination lies the essence of commerce, trust, and memory. Small and unassuming, yet monumental. Civilization, at its heart, is just this. A record of what humans have given, received, and hoped others would remember. And tonight, as you lean back and let the afternoon lull you, you understand something essential. The first receipt isn't merely a note of payment. It's humanity's quiet promise to itself, a whisper from the past saying, tiny imperfections remain, each one a signature of the person who touched it. Somehow, these small human marks, these inconsistencies, make the system feel alive, not mechanical. The rhythm continues. You watch a scribe tally wool from the previous day's delivery, counting cones and discs, arranging them carefully before pressing them into envelopes. You notice the gentle monotony of the work, the soft scrape of stylus against clay, the faint rattle of tokens, the whisper of sandals across the packed earth. It's almost meditative, like watching sunlight ripple across water or listening to the hum of a quiet room late at night. A quirky detail makes you chuckle. One of the apprentices, bored or playful, has pressed a tiny too deep, leaving a curious indentation that looks almost like a tiny smiley face. Historians still debate whether such marks were intentional flourishes or accidental curiosities. You like to imagine that even in the distant past, someone had a tiny sense of humor, leaving a personal signature in the cold, serious clay. As the afternoon stretches, the rhythm of counting, pressing, and sealing envelopes continues uninterrupted. You feel a sense of calm settling over you, a gentle lull induced by repetitive motion and quiet diligence. The temple is alive, but in a slow, meditative way, a place where human ingenuity meets patience, and where each pressed wedge carries the weight of memory and trust. By the time the sun begins to lower toward the horizon, you realize that the temple economy is not just about numbers. It's about creating order from chaos, preserving agreements, and ensuring that each person's work is acknowledged and remembered. In this quiet, sun-drenched courtyard, the gentle art of record-keeping has become the heartbeat of Uruk, and you, lucky observer, are here to watch it unfold. The receipts are more than economic tools. They are social glue, creating predictable patterns in an otherwise unpredictable world. The sun climbs high, and you feel its warmth soaking through your tunic. You watch the farmer tuck his sealed envelope into a cloth satchel, careful not to crease it, careful not to lose the tangible record of his hard work. He adjusts the straps, mutters a quiet hope for a bountiful next season, and begins the long walk back toward his fields. You imagine this journey repeated countless times, each step accompanied by the steady reassurance of clay records, a physical memory to safeguard his efforts. Historians still argue whether farmers ever kept duplicates of these receipts or relied entirely on temple archives. Some evidence suggests small, personal collections of clay envelopes might have been retained, while other scholars insist the temple's records were sufficient. Regardless, the underlying principle remains. Documentation builds trust, and trust is the foundation of any civilization. A gentle breeze stirs the wheat nearby, carrying the faint scent of drying clay and goat hair. You pause to breathe it in, feeling the rhythm of the fields, the hum of commerce, and the human insistence on order. Every step of the farmer, every token pressed, every envelope sealed contributes to a quiet, methodical pulse, like the soft heartbeat of Uruk itself. And as the afternoon sun softens the horizon, casting long shadows over the dusty courtyard, you realize something profound. These clay receipts, small and unassuming, are the invisible threads tying together lives, labor, and the first whispers of structured society. Every farmer, every scribe, every tiny wedge pressed into clay is part of a gentle, sprawling story. A story that begins with a single promise. I give, you receive, we remember. You can almost hear the whisper of divine oversight, a quiet reminder that order matters, even in dust and clay. A playful interruption occurs when a small goat nudges an unattended basket, scattering a few tokens. The scribe sighs, bends down, and carefully returns them to their envelope, shaking his head but chuckling softly. You realize that history isn't a sequence of perfect moments. It's these small interruptions, these human or animal mishaps that give texture and depth to the story. The late afternoon sun casts long, golden rays across the market. The rhythm of pressing, counting, sealing, and inspecting continues, and you find yourself lulled by the repetition. The world moves slowly here, and yet each small act contributes to a larger, invisible order. You trace your fingers along a pressed wedge, imagining the scribe's intent, the farmer's anxiety, and the quiet reliability that clay provides. Historians still debate whether these clay envelopes were exclusively temple managed or if merchants maintained private collections for their own security. Regardless, the principle remains: preserving agreements, recording memory, and creating trust through tangible evidence. These small clay objects are the quiet, invisible scaffolding of civilization, supporting human life in ways that are easy to overlook but impossible to ignore. As the sun dips lower, shadows lengthen, and a gentle breeze carries dust and warmth across the market. You pause to appreciate the subtle rhythm of this world. Every wedge pressed, every token counted, every envelope sealed is a testament to human patience, ingenuity, and the quiet desire to be remembered. And as evening approaches, you realize that in this gentle, sunlit chaos, the first receipts aren't merely documentation. They are the earliest whispers of order in a world learning to trust itself. The cat's presence softens the scene, a gentle reminder that even in the strictest systems, life has its playful interruptions. Historians still argue whether farmers or merchants ever kept personal copies of clay receipts alongside temple records. Evidence is inconclusive, but the principle holds. Tangible records foster trust, and trust is the silent foundation of society. You watch the last envelopes being sealed for the day, imagining the ripple effect. How each token pressed, each wedge carved, ensures accountability across the city, across generations. As night falls, the workshop empties, leaving the faint warmth of clay and the soft hum of distant water. You pause to trace your fingers over a pressed wedge, feeling the weight of human intention, the patience embedded in each impression. This is civilization in miniature. Careful, repetitive, quiet, yet profoundly transformative. And as the sky deepens to navy, dotted with early stars, you lean back against the cool mud wall, letting the rhythm of the temple, the marketplace, and the gentle hum of life settle over you. You realize that even in a world thousands of years removed from your own, humans have sought the same comfort. Memory preserved, promises honored, and the soft assurance that their work matters. In the distance, The faint hum of late-night labor drifts from the granary. A cat curls near a stack of envelopes, tail flicking in idle amusement, an eternal companion to human diligence. You chuckle quietly, noting that some things, cats and paperwork, seem timeless. Even here, in the quiet night, life persists with gentle interruptions, adding texture to the otherwise orderly world. As moonlight glances across the courtyard, you notice the harmony between motion and stillness. The pressed clay, the tokens, the envelopes, the scribes, they all exist in a delicate balance, capturing the quiet heartbeat of civilization. Each mark is a whisper of permanence, a promise that labor, trade, and memory are recorded and honored. The world outside may be chaotic, but within these temple walls, rhythm and order hold sway, quietly reassuring all who witness it. And as the last apprentice extinguishes his lamp and silence drapes over the courtyard, you feel the pulse of Uruk, the soft, persistent heartbeat of a city keeping its own story alive, one wedge, one token, one envelope at a time. His presence adds a subtle ceremonial dimension to the proceedings, a reminder that even the most routine tasks, counting, pressing, sealing, carry weight and meaning. You lean back against a sun-warmed wall, letting the soft rhythm of work, laughter, and occasional animal noise settle over you. Historians still debate how these clay records were stored and organized long-term. Some evidence suggests they were kept meticulously in temple archives. Other interpretations propose that merchants maintained small personal collections. Regardless of storage, the principle is evident. The act of recording is a deliberate attempt to anchor memory, to preserve trust, and to allow human activity to be remembered across time. As the sun begins its descent, bathing the courtyard in warm amber light, you feel a deep sense of connection to the ancient rhythm around you. The pressing of wedges, the careful counting of tokens, and the serene diligence of scribes and apprentices alike reveal a civilization deeply committed to memory, trust, and continuity. Even in this distant past, humans sought reassurance that their work mattered, that promises were tangible, and that order could exist amidst uncertainty. You watch as the last of the day's envelopes are sealed and stacked neatly, the warm clay still holding the faint scent of earth and sun. The courtyard quiets further, but the quiet carries weight. The cumulative hum of civilization, small yet persistent, recorded wedge by wedge, token by token. And you realize that even in these humble acts, the heartbeat of Uruk continues, steady and enduring. The moment is meditative, bridging thousands of years, connecting you to the quiet diligence of Uruk's scribes and farmers. Every press, every seal, every wedge embodies patience and intention, a gentle insistence that human action be remembered. As night deepens, you lean back against a warm wall, listening to the temple settle into quiet. The soft rustle of reeds outside, the faint cooing of doves, and the rhythmic impressions of clay all blend into a hypnotic, comforting cadence. This is civilization's heartbeat, not grandiose but persistent, a gentle assurance that the work, trust, and care of countless hands endure. And as you close your eyes for a moment, the whisper of clay and tokens, of human effort and memory, lulls you into a contemplative stillness. The receipts of Uruk, humble though they may be, are living threads connecting past, present, and future. A quiet symphony of order, diligence, and human presence. Historians still debate whether farmers retained personal copies of receipts or relied entirely on temple records. Regardless, the principle is clear. Tangible documentation fosters accountability and trust, and by extension, the stability of civilization itself. You lean back against the temple wall, letting the gentle rhythm of pressing, sealing, and counting settle over you. A soft meditation on order, memory, and the persistence of human effort. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you realize that the envelopes, these simple, humble clay vessels, are more than receipts. They are enduring reminders of care, diligence, and the desire to be remembered, preserving human action in tangible form. Even in the quietest corners of Uruk, civilization pulses steadily, wedge by wedge, token by token. You lean back against the warm mud brick wall, feeling a gentle calm as you absorb the rhythm of the courtyard. Pressing, counting, sealing, and verifying. A soft, methodical pulse that underpins civilization itself. And as night settles fully over Uruk, you feel the quiet presence of countless human hands, the careful preservation of promises, and the gentle, enduring heartbeat of a city built on trust, diligence, and the soft rhythm of clay and tokens. In this quiet night, you sense the persistent heartbeat of Uruk, the dedication of its people, and the subtle, enduring magic of civilization built one wedge, one token, one envelope at a time. Wind down, 300 words. Now, as the night deepens and the courtyard empties, the pace slows even further. You feel the warmth of baked clay under your fingertips and the soft whisper of the canal water outside, each sound and sensation blending into a gentle lull. The careful rhythm of human hands pressing tokens into clay envelopes repeats in your mind. A soothing cadence, slow and deliberate, reminding you that life is often built in quiet, persistent gestures. Every wedge, every seal, every misaligned token carries not just practical value, but also the essence of human patience and intention. You imagine the scribes, tired but focused, leaving their workstations, the farmers walking home with envelopes in hand, and the city settling under the soft glow of torchlight. The envelopes remain, silent witnesses to effort and trust, enduring in their simplicity. Even the tiny imperfections, the smudges, the slightly crooked wedges, the playful marks, soften the rigidity of the system, leaving room for humanity to shine through. As you let yourself sink into this rhythm, your breathing slows, mirroring the gentle pulse of Uruk itself. The city hums quietly, a civilization in miniature, reminding you that stability and trust are not achieved in grand, fleeting moments, but through thousands of patient, careful acts repeated across time. There is a comfort in this, the thought that small, deliberate efforts ripple outward, creating networks of memory, accountability, and care that endure far longer than a single day. Allow your eyes to close, letting the soft echoes of wedges pressed into clay, the faint rustle of goats, and the distant murmur of water carry you into a calm, restful state. You can almost hear the slow heartbeat of trade, the faint rustle of civilization figuring itself out. As dusk settles, you glance one last time at the scribe's tablet. It is drying perfectly, the marks crisp, permanent. The first receipts, if we can call them that, aren't just about proof of payment. They're about trust, continuity, and the audacity to believe that memory can live outside the human brain. The stars appear early tonight, soft and ancient. You lie back on the warm earth, eyes half closed, listening to the distant echo of someone stamping clay. Somewhere between that sound and the whispering reeds of the river, the world's first bureaucracy is born. And you, lucky time traveler, get to watch it unfold. The merchant yawns, rubs his eyes, and begins to pack his remaining tokens into a basket. He'll carry them to the temple, trade them for new ones tomorrow, maybe argue over measurements again. Civilization, after all, thrives on paperwork, even the clay kind. You stand, brushing dust from your clothes. The ground beneath you is littered with tiny impressions. Footprints, goat hooves, bits of cracked clay. Each one a record, each one accidental. You smile to yourself, thinking how humans, even at their simplest, have always wanted to leave marks that mean something. Whether it's a token for a goat or a receipt for a latte, it's all the same impulse. I gave. You owe. We remember. The sun begins to dip toward the horizon, turning the clay tokens a soft, glowing orange. The merchant hums a slow tune, content with his counts for the day. You take one last look at the basket, full of the small shapes that made memory tangible, and realize you're standing at the crossroads where play, necessity, and trust all collided and quietly changed the world. The scribes gather their tools, the apprentices their leftover clay. One boy lingers, staring at the rows of envelopes drying like small, patient moons. You watch him press his thumb into a lump of spare clay, absent-mindedly leaving an imprint, his first mark, a signature of sorts, and you can almost hear the future whisper. This is how it starts. As the shadows lengthen and the city settles into its soft evening hum, you walk away from the drying yard. Behind you, the world's first sealed contracts lie under the open sky, cooling quietly into permanence. The air cools too, the dust soft beneath your feet, and the slow revolution of clay and trust carries on, unnoticed by the sleepy, honest people who made it. Civilization, in its humblest form, continues to pulse gently beneath the stars, a quiet reassurance that human effort matters and memory endures. Drift with this rhythm, trusting that the world, both ancient and present, rests on countless small acts of care.